Thank you, everybody who's joining us. We'll give everyone a minute to hop on in, and then we'll get started. Just giving everyone a couple more seconds. Thank you to everyone who's joining us on this lovely afternoon. All right, we'll go ahead and get started as folks are still trickling in. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We're so excited to have you here on Digital Inclusion Week. Just some housekeeping items before we get started. The first is we do apologize. We were having some technical issues with the closed captioning. So unfortunately, we don't have closed captioning for the webinar today, but once we have the recording, we will make sure that the recorded video has closed captioning. So if that is an issue for you, please know that we will have the recording available with that. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to any of us and we can make sure we get you accommodated there. And as I just said, we will have a recording of today's presentation. So be on the lookout afterwards. If you want to view it yourself or share it with somebody, we will circulate that once it's ready. Thank you again to everyone who has joined us. My name is Lauren Gatis. I am with the Glen Echo Group, and I also work with Network On. Network On is a campaign that celebrates digital adoption. We are so thrilled to be with you for Digital Inclusion Week today. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, "Great stories happen to those who can tell them." And we are here to help you tell your great story. And so I will turn it over to Yvette to introduce herself and NDIA.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us, especially joining us during Digital Inclusion Week. It's one of the happiest times of the year. One of the things I look forward most to. And this webinar lands at a great time because Digital Inclusion Week is just the best time to actually recognize the work that you're doing every day, spread awareness about it, and actually have some of you in the spotlight sharing what you do every day and why it matters and how your community benefits from that work and from digital equity. So I'm the communications director at National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I've been working in the digital inclusion space for about 8 years and in communication. So definitely doing a lot of storytelling and branding work and all things communications and marketing. NDIA, if you don't know, is an alliance that brings community organizations together to advance digital equity and help advance policy. So we work with 1,400 affiliate organizations in all 50 states and DC, where I'm located, and 6 US territories, and try to create those community spaces where you all can learn from each other and share, take action, and influence policy ultimately to advance digital equity. And I'll put a link in our chat so you can see more about Digital Inclusion Week, and be sure to see what other events are happening and sign up there that you are taking action this week. And I'll kick it to Danny.
Awesome. So I'm Danny Leopold Bogage. I'm a director at the Glen Echo Group. The Glen Echo Group is a public affairs firm based in DC. And we focus on tech policy issues and specifically how tech can be a force for good in the world. So that means we work on everything from broadband adoption and access to spectrum sharing to content moderation to cybersecurity issues. But Lauren and I work very closely on broadband issues, and specifically, the two of us have been pretty closely focused on the Affordable Connectivity Program. So a lot of the examples that we might be using today will probably bring in ACP in some form or another. But really, I guess I'm really excited to be here today to be able to help this group. So if you go to the next slide, just why we're here today. As digital equity practitioners, you are incredibly busy, not just Digital Inclusion Week, but all year long, as we know. And we really wanted to make sure that during this week, where you might be getting a lot of media requests, or perhaps you're doing more outreach than usual to be able to spread the word about events and activities that you have going on, that you're able to have the tools to be able to tell your story in the most effective way. Because storytelling is important for advocacy, for awareness, for outreach, like I said, because it helps make your message so much more memorable. The facts and the statistics are all really important, and we absolutely need to use those as proof points in the stories we're telling. But the stories themselves show the why, the people whose lives we're affecting with digital inclusion and why we're doing this work in the first place. Plus, during Digital Inclusion Week, we're reaching other audiences than perhaps are normally talking about this term of digital equity and what does that mean. And telling a story helps make that concept more real for people. So basically, we wanted to do this so that if you happen to be in the news this week, and as you're going forward, you're able to bring the message back to your mission, help you figure out what you need to be able to highlight. So we'll be able to dive into that a bit more.
I will also add, Danny, to that, that, policymakers, some policymakers like don't personally know anybody who is affected by the digital divide. They don't know anyone who doesn't have internet at home or, a device. And this is just one way that storytelling can be used to actually present a reality to people in power and people who can actually affect change in this sense. And the storytelling can bring in that sense of empathy and understanding that otherwise they may not have. So really exciting way to use it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yvette. And just to give a little bit more context for all of the many terms that we might be throwing around to essentially be talking about the same thing, communications. I mentioned we're a public affairs firm at Glen Echo Group. So most of the time we're pretty focused on reaching the government, reaching policymakers. But we also do a lot of public relations work. And we know that you all are very familiar with outreach and needing to talk to donors, funders, other constituents and community members. And they really all fall under this umbrella. Like I said, it all depends on the audience and what your goal is.
So just to dive in a bit more to some goals that you might have for your communications and for your storytelling this week and beyond. Without a goal, you're just sort of speaking into the void. So one thing that we really encourage you to think about is, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve, like I said, during Digital Inclusion Week and throughout the rest of the year, next year, and beyond? And so here are some goals that we think you should consider. And the nice thing about all of these goals that we're presenting is that oftentimes the same stories and the same messages can be used to accomplish all the goals. So you're not doing 4 separate communications plans or anything like that. These are just really to get you thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to do it. So the first goal, this is something that I'm sure everyone who's tuning in is very familiar with, and it's just raising awareness among your constituents. It's so important for the people who you're trying to serve to know that you're trying to serve them and know what kind of things that you can do to help them. You all face a unique challenge in this way because many of your constituents are not going to be online or not online all the time, and so that's something for you to consider, as I'm sure you already do. But so that's the first goal we have for you. The second goal is continuing the momentum around this conversation, especially if you are able to get some excitement around Digital Inclusion Week. You're in the news, you throw a big event. That is awesome, and we want you to keep that momentum up throughout the rest of the week. As you know, digital inclusion is important year round, not just during Digital Inclusion Week. So it's really important to keep up that momentum. It's a marathon. It's not just a sprint during this week. This is something that I know is near and dear to everyone's heart, staying top of mind with donors and policymakers, especially with all the federal funding that's out right now. And there's state funding and there's local funding that's available for your donors and your policymakers who are giving this funding to you, whether, like I said, through a federal or a state program or just through a donor who's making a donation to you. It's important not only to stay accountable to that and show them that you're good stewards of that funding, but also get them to understand what important work you're doing and get them to keep giving you that money and get the attention of new potential donors or folks who can help you out. So that's our third goal here. And finally, as Danny mentioned, we are very interested in ACP over here. I know many of you are as well. Many of you have been helping people sign up for ACP, and we love that. Of course, you're familiar with the fact that funding is almost certainly going to run out early next year. So ACP is sort of the most immediate policy goal that I think many of you probably have. And of course, there are other funding programs available. So one communications goal for you to consider is how you're going to advocate to your policymakers on every level. Just to show how important digital inclusion is, and then also advocate for these programs. And so once you really think about your goals, it's time to make a plan.
And a plan is really just three parts. First, you want to define your audience. You want to figure out who are the key people that need to know what you're doing. It's not just going to be like a grant officer, decision maker, or just your constituents. We'll talk about that a little bit more, about getting a little bit more specific on who your audience is. And once you figure that out, you want to refine your message and hone it for the things that they most care about. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then it's time to tell your story. You're ready to go. And we'll overview some tactics that you can use to be able to tell your story. And we will also give you a chance to practice telling your story a little bit later as well.
So anyone who has a background in marketing on this webinar will know that the general public doesn't cut it as an audience. You got to get more specific. Because each of your different audiences, they might need to hear things in a different way or be told a different story to get your message across. And so there are lots of different people and groups that can be audiences for you. Some that you should consider that I'm sure you're already working with. Think about those community leaders, especially if you are in a small town, for instance. There might be a very influential pastor or your mayor, somebody who can get people's attention, and you want them on your side so they can deliver your message to the important people as well. Your community members, we all know that person who everybody in your community trusts. You want that person to be an advocate for you. So think about who those people might be and who can help tell your story for you. The industry players. These might be businesses in your town. These might be the ISPs in your town. Who are the folks that can donate either funding or resources for those who might offer digital navigation services? Who are the businesses that will let you set up a table in their store in order to sign people up for ACP? Think about those types of folks. And then, of course, policymakers. And we mean this at every single level. Of course, Danny and I are both based in Washington, D.C. So, of course, there's your U.S. representatives, your senators. but there's also your mayor and your local state representative and the ag commissioner in your state. Think about those folks and who needs to hear your story. And now we have an activity for you, Trisha, if you want to switch. So what we would like all of you to do is to either scan the QR code or go to www.menti.com and enter the code. And we'll leave this up for a minute or so that everyone can scan in. And we would love to hear from you who your audiences are. And this is intended as an exercise, not only for you to get your own juices flowing and thinking about who your audiences are, but also to just share ideas. Maybe if you put someone on your Chamber of Commerce, someone might think, oh, that's a really great idea. I'll reach out to my Chamber of Commerce. So really try to submit answers that are creative and can help other people along. So we'll leave this up for just a few more seconds, and then we'll hop on over to Mentimeter to see the results.
And I'll underscore something you said, Lauren. All those audiences you mentioned on the last slide, they all connect to broader goals you may have and to what you want your ultimate big picture to be. So make sure that you're thinking about what people you need at the table, who needs to listen to your message and to your story, and what do you want to ask them to do? What is your call to action? All of that kind of goes into thinking about who the audiences are.
All right, we
So
have some awesome suggestions here, and it's happening live in front of us. So community leaders, that's huge. Lobbyists, school districts, that's an awesome one, because you certainly want to work with your schools for so many different levels. Mayors, library users, youth organizations. Oh, that's a great one. I've also seen examples of folks like digital inclusion organizations that work with like local youth groups that help people like learn how to use devices and stuff. It's really cool.
And the mention of a state broadband office or your state government officials, particularly important right now. Of course, a lot of states are releasing their state digital equity plans. So you want to know those people. You want to influence those plans and tell your stories and, communicate what you do and what your community is all about.
I love health centers. That's huge, especially with how big telehealth is now. If you're able to work with health centers to help maybe get some of their patients online, that's huge. Senior centers. We were talking to a group. It's a senior center that does digital literacy classes for seniors, and it's so cool. Like they taught all these seniors how to FaceTime their grandkids. Like it's just it's a really awesome initiative, and something that is certainly doable in many different communities across the US. Awesome. Well, we will save this and we'll share this along. It'll be in the recording. We'll also share the word cloud. So as you think about, when you go back and think about who you want to communicate to, you can use this as inspiration because there's lots of really good ideas here.
And so now that we've spent some time thinking about our audiences, we also just wanted to touch on, no matter who your audience is, there are certain things that make a good story. And we know, even though these are sort of like the principles of newsworthiness, if you will, but they aren't just for talking with the press. We know this is what will get and keep people's attention. And so some of them, like conflict, when we're talking about digital inclusion doesn't necessarily need to be like Republicans and Democrats are fighting. Like the conflict can also be a bit more existential, or about like what some of the barriers are to, like, societal barriers there are to access or equity or inclusion, or etc. The timeline and future, I think for our case, really for Digital Inclusion Week is really helpful. We have timely stories right now because of this week and because of the clock ticking on ACP funding. And I think the unusual example, everyone always says man bites dog, that doesn't happen every day, as opposed to a dog biting man, which I hope does not happen every day. But I think I also think of this as not only being unusual, but something unique. And I think a lot of what you all are doing is unique. People might think, oh, to sign someone up, for a program, they need to be working with a social worker, or to learn any digital skills, they have to be in a school classroom setting or something like that. And what you all are doing is going to your communities or doing different creative programming with your communities. You're signing people up at a football game, or you're, hosting really creative and innovative programs. So I think that piece alone really helps you get at this part of the story.
So let's dive into some of the tactics you can use to tell your story. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. We are not by any means suggesting that you need to deploy every single one of these methods on this list, but we wanted to, we lost our screen for a second. We'll get that back up there. But when it comes to all the tactics to consider, like we said, there is, you don't have to use all these options, but we just wanted to give you some ideas that you can use to tell your story using different avenues. The first and probably the most obvious one, and one that we will be digging into a bit more in just a bit, is the media. Digital Inclusion Week. This is a great time to reach out to your local reporters, whether that's print, whether that's TV. There's so many different avenues, different types of media that you can work with. And, after this is over, just shoot them a note, say, hey, it's Digital Inclusion Week. Would love to talk to you about the great work that we're doing. Here's this event you could come to. This is a really great hook, Digital Inclusion Week, that you can use. And of course, you all know with the media, there are going to be constituents who do not have access to Twitter or do not have access to read stories online, but they do see the paper, they do watch the local news at night. So media is going to be especially important to reach those folks. Networking and relationship building. This is key. We talked about all of our audiences. Get out there and go meet people. Go to events where you might meet the folks who can help you get your story out. That's a hugely important part of the business that we all do. And related to that is community listening sessions. One of the audience that was just suggested was the senior centers. So, maybe reach out to your senior center, see if you can talk to the director there, get a couple seniors in the room, and just really listen to them and see what services they need and see how you might be able to help. This is a really good way to show that you're being thoughtful and show that you really want to hear from your community about what they need and how you can help them. Ads, there's a few different avenues here. There's, of course, more traditional ads. There's the billboards, there's bus stops, there's print ads, there's radio ads. Radio ads can be so helpful if you get on your local radio station. And as we discussed, this is critical for the folks who are not currently subscribed to the internet. Another side of this ads is paid social media campaigns or online ads. This would be more for when you're trying to reach your policymakers and reaching the folks who you want to either make good decisions on your behalf or potentially provide you with resources. That's a great way. Targeted social media ads. Like I said, sometimes, when we work with our clients, I'll do a targeted social media ad that's directly within a mile of the US Capitol, because I'm trying to reach the policymakers. So if that's something you're considering, that could be a really effective way.
And ads are great. But if you don't have a budget for ads, there are plenty of ways. I mean, you mentioned getting media attention. So, if you don't have money for radio advertising, that's okay. That's what earned media is for. So
Yeah.
you can, find out a way to pitch to a radio show that you can be interviewed on, a local NPR station. That kind of thing can be really great in reaching people and free.
Yes, absolutely. And then op-eds, letters to the editors, similar. These are a really great way to really make your case, especially if you're trying to convince a local lawmaker to support the Affordable Connectivity Program, or explain what digital inclusion is. This is a great way to get sort of a longer statement out versus just a media interview. Another great opportunity to really share information.
And direct mail is what it sounds like. You are sending folks things directly to them. This is also really great, a way to reach folks who might not already be online and don't have access otherwise. One pagers and visuals are a great way to tell a story with data, or if you have statistics that you want to make a little bit more compelling. Community events is not just hosting your own event or even going, to the local job fair or the church barbecue or something like that. But it can also mean participating in like digital inclusion community events and digital equity community events, sharing best practices that you've learned that through your work in your organization. Newsletters and social media, I think you all are probably pretty familiar with those. They, are great ways to reach people as well. Newsletters more directly and social media a bit more broadly. But choosing the right mix of tactics for you is, different depending on who your audience is, what your message is, the resources you have available. So these are just, again, to consider, sort of a menu to think about. By no means do we expect everyone to be able to do everything always.
And we actually just got a question from Ryan. Any words of advice for locals that might not be super practiced in pitching stories or doing marketing work? You read our minds because we have a lot of advice on working with the media that Danny will go through. Oh, that's a great suggestion, joining a Toastmasters club to practice. That's a really great way to practice interviewing.
So this is a little bit of how we like to think about the preparation for a media interview, but also I think it's a really good way to think about framing your message when you're talking to really anyone and doing any outreach. So if you think about how you usually tell a story, usually it kind of goes like this. You start with an intro, make your case, and then ta-da. So I might say, well, I wanted to tell you today about the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's a $30 subsidy, and there's also a one-time device benefit. It actually started as the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program during the pandemic because we realized so many people needed a way to get online who didn't otherwise have access. And, it's been around for a pretty long time now, and lots of people are using it, and it might run out of funding, and a bunch of people could lose access. Like, did you pay any attention by the end? No, I completely lost you. And all of that information is important, when needing to describe what the program is to people. But the way that we recommend trying to talk about the story is the way that the press talks about a story. So this is the way that folks are used to reading the news in the newspaper, or hearing about it on the news, starting with what is the most important, and then going into the supporting information. Yvette, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I think I saw something in the chat as I was talking about how I might be able to improve my sort of meandering point about the ACP just now.
Yeah. Also, have you been on the internet? Have you been on TikTok? That is what you're competing with. You have to get to the point. You are going to lose people. So, if you really want to get your message across, which you do because digital inclusion matters to you, this is kind of the way to go, and the way to also pitch to reporters, because they want to see what they can put at the top, at the headline in the first sentence, and then the rest they're not going to pay that much attention to. So I wanted to give an example of just using an ACP story. And I don't love to always I don't love to start with something bad or to say what's at risk necessarily. But given the way things are with ACP, that is kind of what we have to point out. That is the urgency of the matter, is saying what's at risk. So we're going to kick this off with the lead. Matthew is one of 21 million Americans at risk of losing internet access if the Affordable Connectivity Program runs out of funding. You can keep talking then about Matthew's story, who he is, what ACP is, it's $30 a month, the history of ACP, all that other stuff. But what we're starting with is something to get people alarmed, right? Like saying 21 million people, but also pointing to an individual, and then elaborating on that, and what's at stake here. So, I see a lot of stories out there, like blogs, where it can start with something like, the Affordable Connectivity Program provides $30 a month, blah, 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 blah. But that's not our hook right now, right? That's not what's moving people to action. So think about what's going to move people and put that up at the top.
Also, when you're wanting to share information about an event with a reporter, perhaps that you might be having, starting with those 5 W's, like on Tuesday, October 10th, we're hosting an ACP Palooza at such and such place. At what time? Here's some details. This is why it's important. Hope to see you there. Something like that. Like, you want to lead with that information that they need right up front. And when you're talking to anyone, not just reporters, you want to make sure that you don't bury the message. You want to focus on why this would matter to them, what it means for them, and why they should care. And then, exactly, always thinking about, so what? Like, okay, great. $30 a month. Why? Matthew is able to, apply for jobs after he lost his job because he has internet access now from ACP, et cetera, like focusing on the why, the so what is so important.
Yeah. Another story I'm working on right now, actually, a real story dealing with ACP. If Phyllis loses that $30 a month benefit, that $30 is the exact same amount as one of her prescriptions. What is Phyllis going to do without that benefit, without that $30 a month?
So when, like I said, there's usually, there's sometimes people are saying, like, when is the right time and why do we want to reach out to media? I think right now we have that timeliness aspect that makes it a great time to reach out to folks. Or like I said, you might already have people reaching out to you. The story you have to tell is a really important one. And I think a lot of people will be interested to hear it. And the why, like, it's a great way to get your message out there. It builds your relationship with the reporter, so you can, interact with them not just during Digital Inclusion Week, but when you have other events or program milestones or whatnot throughout the year. And it builds your credibility, not just with the reporter, but as an organization. So when you're going to donors, when you're doing anything, any advocacy work, you can share that piece of media coverage that has your great interview with, the local paper and say, like, this is why my community cares about what we're doing, or this is how I describe our organization, and use that as a proof point to show how important your organization is. And I feel like that can feel like a lot of pressure, and I don't want media outreach to feel scary. So if you go to the next slide, we have some tips that hopefully will help you feel a little bit more comfortable when talking with the media. It really, like we said, like spending the time to do the preparation can help so much. So whether it's joining Toastmasters or, talking with a family member or with a colleague and just practicing what you're saying, talking to your pet, whatever it might be, that can really help a lot. Doing your homework and understanding the reporter's style and tendencies. So just familiarizing yourself with other coverage. Maybe they've already written about the ACP before, and so you aren't going to have to explain that. Or maybe they covered Digital Inclusion Week last year, and again, they're already familiar with it. Or maybe this is brand new to them. Taking openings when you see them. We as communicators is probably the most heartbreaking moment when we see someone in an interview and a reporter says, anything else we should talk about today, or anything else you wanted to touch on? And they say, nope, you know what? I think we covered it. Oh, it's soul crushing. Because maybe you've talked about it before, but you should always take that opportunity to say whatever your message is again, summarize it, or even something as simple as, I'm so glad we got to talk about what we're doing for Digital Inclusion Week today. I just wanted to mention that, please check out our website if you want to know more about our programming. We're doing this Digital Inclusion Week all year long, and we'd love for you to get involved, or something like that. Whatever it might be, just take that opportunity to once again say your message. The don'ts, I think a lot of them are pretty straightforward, but obviously if there are questions, we can talk about them. The biggest one that's the hardest for me, aside from filler words, is feeling the need to fill a period of silence. It's okay to just answer the question, even if it's not going to touch on anything. Almost always a reporter will end with, is there anything else? So you'll have that opportunity to be able to add on anything. But the reporter, will ask you those follow-up questions, so you don't have to worry about, shoving everything you want to touch on and all of the details and all of the information into your very first answer.
It's also okay not to answer a question. So like it's perfectly fine to say, that's really not what we do here, or that's really not my area of expertise. And then you bring it back and reinforce whatever you want to talk about. That's perfectly fine in it. And, that way you're not caught in an uncomfortable place talking about something that you don't feel great talking about.
And one thing that I would add too, and this goes to not only when you're in an interview, but also when you might be having another conversation with a reporter, not in the context of an interview, but maybe, you've reached out, you've shared some information, and you just grab coffee to talk about all the things that you've got going on. Something important to keep in mind is that anything that you say to a reporter, please know that it could end up somewhere. I work with reporters all the time. I trust a lot of reporters. I believe that they are just doing their jobs, and I can appreciate that. But I never say anything to a reporter that I wouldn't want to be in print. And so that's something to keep in mind. Especially, these don'ts columns, certainly don't lose your cool or lie or exaggerate, but anything that you might say could be used. So just keep that in mind.
Great. And storytelling is all good, but we also want to make sure that we are doing it right with the utmost respect and ethical practices in working with our communities. So if you are trying to share stories about, for example, about someone that you serve with your digital inclusion services, you definitely need to think about how you are incorporating some of these practices and some of these tips. So we don't want to use storytelling that's bringing people down, that's focusing on the struggle. That's I always think about the commercials around Christmas time where they like play Sarah McLachlan, and you're just like, I have a body reaction to this. Like This is really uncomfortable. So we don't want to do any of that to our communities, not just to our pets, but we don't want to do that to people. We see that all the time as a practice with some nonprofits. So that's the opposite of what we're looking for. Ethical storytelling really is something that you want to use throughout the process. So the practice of consent in first sitting down with someone, you want to be really open and describe why you want to talk to them, how you might use their story, which parts of their story are they comfortable with you sharing. And then, that's the first part of the process. As you continue, you keep asking, and you keep making sure that there is consent and the person's excited about sharing, and that they feel like they are benefiting from the experience as well, and that their community is going to benefit from it, and that they have the opportunity to review what you are sharing. That's not a process for journalism, but it can be a process for us as organizations who are working with our community members. It's a matter of protecting them, respecting them, and doing this in the right way and in a dignified way.
Now we have one more activity for you all, and we want you to think. So after this webinar, you're gonna go email your reporters in your community, and you're gonna say, hey, I have a really cool Digital Inclusion Week event this week. We would love for you to come talk about it. Or if you don't have an event, say, this week is Digital Inclusion Week. My organization is doing these things, and we would love to talk to you more about why digital inclusion is so important. And so let's think about what your messaging can be and what your talking points can be. So if we go to the next slide, we have another Mentimeter. It's the same one as before. So if you go to your browser window, if you scan the QR code, you should be able to get to the same spot. But so let's brainstorm here what your top talking point should be. And that should be something you're really proud of. So if a reporter says, what are you doing for Digital Inclusion Week? Or what are you doing to support individuals in your community? What would you say? And so if you go to Mentimeter, you should be able to enter that in. We'll get that up in a second. All right, it looks like it's up on Mentimeter. So if you go to that tab, if you had to brag about one thing your organization is doing, what would it be? And think about how you might tell a reporter about this. And we'll use this. This is another thing that we can crowdsource from each other. So if you're really proud of something, tell us, and then everyone else on the webinar will get an idea of it. Connecting 100+ families. That's amazing. Congratulations to whoever just submitted that. That means 100 families have access to the internet. 100 families can apply for jobs or do homework online. Like, that's incredible.
Your local broadcast TV news would be like on the way with their truck if you
Oh, yeah, 100%. Working to get the word out about organizations providing affordable access to broadband. Love it. Digital navigator programs. Digital navigators are huge, and such a good story. That's something that, if you can get a digital navigator talking to a camera, that's amazing. Facilitating digital skills workshops. That is so awesome. You can invite a reporter to that. 300+ families with ACB. Okay, we've got some competition here.
It's not competition. They're probably different places.
Exactly. 100, 300, 4, whatever it is, that's incredible.
There are plenty of people out there who need to be connected.
Yes. Applied for a grant to get us 50 new laptops and hotspots. That's awesome. A landmark building to light up teal for Digital Inclusion Week. I think you need to send pictures of that to Yvette.
Yeah.
I love it.
This is such exciting work. And also, I would think in all of these cases, if you can, you know, break it down to what is the human level of that story. You know, if you have one of those folks that you helped sign up for ACP, what is some stuff about that family? Maybe that family, you know, you can use this storytelling and see if someone's willing to tell their story in order to help get the word out about ACP. You know, that's something too that the media would love to feature. And some people would love to talk about their experience with that, you know.
And one thing, you know, to Yvette's point about ethical storytelling, you know, you might not have a story to tell from somebody who is a recipient, but maybe one of your digital navigators can talk about what they do every day, because digital navigators, they have a really cool job. And so it would be cool for the media, for social media, or anyone to hear about what a digital navigator does, because that's really, really impressive. All right, well, we can go back to the slide deck, and these answers will be available again in the recording. So if you want some inspiration, they are certainly there for you. And we'll just round this out, just sharing, you know, we've talked about your audiences, we've talked about your tools, we've talked about messaging and how to tell a story. And so these are just some examples of how the story can look. These are news stories from Digital Inclusion Week last year. You know, these headlines are incredible. West Virginia Office of Broadband promotes digital equity. Digital Inclusion Week provides computer education classes and workshops. That's really awesome. And, you know, some of the other things that you can share, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but share the local events where people can meet you, share the different options for affordable broadband, what the benefits of connectivity looks like. You know, we all live in this world, we all are on our devices right now. What can being connected do for someone who isn't currently connected right now? That's super important. And of course, those success stories, those are incredibly important to share too.
And I'm seeing those local news hits already again this year. So it's really exciting to see folks on the news talking about digital inclusion again in Detroit. Awesome. And I think in Boston, I've seen something, and just there's a lot of them floating around. So it's definitely something that's of wide interest, especially I think to TV news, and your reach on TV news can be huge. Like you can definitely reach people who need your services who wouldn't otherwise hear about you. And ultimately, that's like the biggest win, you know, we can have is like funding and helping people, you know, this beautiful combination. So definitely try to take advantage of Digital Inclusion Week and do all that. I'll also put the link again for our page because we have a couple toolkits. So if you're like, oh, this is a little hard, we have a media advisory template. So you can just go to it, put in your event information, and send it to some local media. You know, just pick a few television reporters and give it your best shot. The worst that can happen is that they don't say anything. That's very likely. Or maybe they say, we are full this week, but we'll consider you another time, and you're on their radar. So you never know how that can end up.
Now, we have had some questions throughout the presentation, but feel free to enter any additional questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A box. We're happy to answer them. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I will just share. So Network On, we're a campaign in support of digital adoption. We are hosting, along with NDIA, our Connect 20 Summit in November. I'm going to share this in the chat. We would love to see you continue the conversation. It should be a really great meeting of minds in November. Any questions?
And the questions can be not just stuff we covered today, but
yeah,
people's minds. They're they do a lot of work with media. It could be about pitching, it could be about storytelling. Use this last 10 minutes and ask what you want to ask.
I feel like we need the Jeopardy music going. Well, we can share, if we want to go to the next slide, this has all of our contact information. So we'll give it a few more seconds for questions, but if you want to reach any of us, if you don't want to put your question in the chat, but you have a question, feel free to email any of us. And also, I'm pretty sure Yvette would love it if you sent any stories that you have from Digital Inclusion Week in your local media. Send those to Yvette so she can use them.
Absolutely. And share them on social media, of course. We're using hashtag DIW 2023 all week. So definitely monitoring all of that closely. And also, when it's not Digital Inclusion Week and I'm pulled a million different ways, if you're an NDIA affiliate or, an organization doing digital inclusion work, and you need help throughout the year because you want to pitch to press or you have a press interview and you want to run things by someone, reach out to me. We are here to help as much as we can. Sometimes I won't have the capacity, but we'd love to help you out with that throughout the year.
Well, it doesn't look like we've gotten any questions, and I can see the participant numbers dropping. So we will call it there. But like we said, please reach out if you have any questions. We will follow up with some additional resources as well as the recording. So feel free to use those, share those around. And we just thank you again for joining us today.
And thanks to Glen Echo for partnering on this webinar. It was great having you all present.
Yes.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.